Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter to you. All right, welcome to the Main Street Podcast. We're excited today with his inaugural visit. We've got the great representative from District 19, a BSU grad, went to Vermont Law School, doctorate from NNU, family man, dad, Coast Guard veteran. Hopefully we can get into the details of all these things, but Representative Chris Mathias, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
This is big for me because we've been, you're a popular name around. You get a lot of stuff done, objectively very likable, well-dressed. You check all the boxes. So this is big for the Main Street Podcast to have you here covering all the big issues. How is the session going?
It's coming out. I will tell you, the very first week of session, usually it's light.
Sure.
Things are slow. Things aren't moving quickly. And you plan on, since you're seeing a lot of your friends for the first time in a few months, you plan on spending that Friday night going out to dinner or something like that. That first Friday night of the first week of session, I was exhausted. I was tired. Not sick and tired. I was just tired. And I went home and slept. And it has maintained that pace ever since.
Really?
It's fast and it's a lot.
Because historically, I've compared the Idaho State Legislature to like a kid who's told he's got to clean his room, and he puts it off until right when he's told he can't go to the movies unless he cleans it. And then it feels like you guys are super effective in the last few weeks.
Sure.
But it does feel different this go around. It feels like it's been busier.
I think so. And I think, probably the national political scene, the new administration in D.C. is probably equipping and emboldening red states to just bring it. If you got it, bring it.
Yeah.
We'll stress test it. Some of it will pass, some of it won't, but let's just do it now. If you can't do it now, when are you going to do it?
Right. So there is a sense of urgency, which is interesting because you haven't billed yourself as the designated obstructionist, which you could be. Full, spoiler alert, you're a Democrat in Idaho, but you haven't taken the role of, okay, the Republicans are bringing it. My job is going to be to stop everything. How come you haven't taken that role?
I mean, first of all, I can't stop everything, so it would be foolish for me to think and carry myself every day as if I could. But I'm also one of the few Democrats that did party work before I got elected. So I was a state committee man. I sat on the Democratic Party's executive committee. So I lived in the world where I had to wear my identity as an Idaho Democrat heavily. And I knocked for everyone. I did all the things. And then I got to the building. I got elected in 2020. I got sworn in. My first session was 2021. And I immediately realized that wearing my identity as a Democrat heavily was going to work against me. So I intentionally wear my partisan identity lightly. And when you do that, when you realize that the whole world doesn't need to be viewed through a partisan lens, I think it really gives you an opportunity to pick and choose your battles, to kind of use the term that we were talking about earlier.
But you've taken upon yourself to localize politics. And a lot of Idahoans, their consumption of political news and even policy is national. Right? You talk about new administration, that when they're not consuming localized politics, it makes it harder for you to say that really not all these votes are partisan.
Correct. And that's been a long kind of slog for me, because I get a lot of emails from constituents or just Idahoans generally, saying this is going on in D.C. or this is going on in Florida. And I just have to say, with all due respect, that's unfortunate, or I don't have a problem with that, but that's so far outside of my ability to influence. I mean, I'm a member of a super minority in Idaho.
Yeah.
So asking me to go above and beyond the state's borders to fix problem, I have to be smart with myself as a human resource.
Yeah.
And I have to pace myself, and I'm just a legislative tortoise,
Yeah. So what percent of votes do you think aren't partisan or shouldn't be partisan that come before the legislature, the Idaho House? How often are you saying really this isn't a red and blue issue?
I would say, well, there's two ways to look at it. One, you can look at it, which votes just break down straight party lines, 61-9. And I would say 48% of votes break down straight along party line. It's under 10%. And then I think you can look at another 20% that are almost party line with, what Dorothy Moon might call rhinos vote with the Democrats. Maybe that's another 20%. So maybe 30%. I'll say 30%.
Okay.
I feel good with that.
And do you think that the legislature's spending time on the right issues?
I think the better way to frame that question is, do I think the legislator is spending adequate time on the issues most Idahoans want us to focus on. And I always point to this analogy where if anyone knocks on 100 doors in their district, they're going to hear a series of most frequent answers.
Sure. And
in most districts, if any legislator knocks 100 randomly selected doors in their district, they're probably going to hear the following. I'll tell you what I'll hear in my district. Residential property taxes and the shift that has occurred onto residential homeowners.
Okay.
It's become unsustainable from a lot of people's perspective. I get it. I think the second one is cost of living. It has just become too challenging to put a roof over your kid's head.
Yeah.
And then kind of the downstream consequences of growth. Protecting ag land, productive ag land, zoning issues. We just heard a bill yesterday on the floor. Representative Palmer got a bill across the floor that preempts local governments from requiring certain new developments to have, electric vehicle chargers, or at least be pre-plumbed for chargers. So I think these types of dynamics, the housing number 2, residential property taxes, growth, I think these are things you're going to hear. So back to your question, do we spend enough time talking about those 3 things? Not in a productive way. And one of the things I hearken on a lot, and I did again this morning in House Education, is, there is a kind of a proposed process that lawmakers are supposed to follow. At least this is what we teach our high school students and our college students. Step 1, identify the problem. Step 2, identify all of your viable options for addressing that problem. 3, select and implement your solution. 4, evaluate how that implementation went, and then feed back what you learned into the implementation. I think we skip step 1 a lot, and most of our time is fighting over step 2 when we actually don't know whether there's unanimity on step 1.
How do you fix that?
I think there's a few different ways. One, I think you got to model good behavior. Like I cannot control other people. I can barely control my kids. I definitely cannot control other politicians. I can't control voters. So I have to model that behavior, which is what I try to do. Secondly, I'm never going to hold a gavel in our building. I'm never going to be a governor, a U.S. senator, or anything like that. So the question becomes, how can I empower people who see the same problems I see? How can I empower and equip and support them in their efforts to do this, to make sure we're talking about very specific problems and that we're considering all of our options before we, spend $70,000 a day in taxpayer money to run bills and things like that. So, model good behavior, support my friends, talk about it publicly, and none of this is sexy.
Yeah.
None of this is Twitter worthy, X worthy. None of this is. And so it's unfortunate, but, as long as I can keep people engaged, certain people engaged, I will.
And you're in a unique seat where it's not politically advantageous for some of your friends on the other side of the aisle to team up with you, and it may be a political liability that's going to get slapped on a campaign mailer, particularly as we see hyper-polarized primaries in Idaho, on the right especially. Right? You got really conservative people who are getting primaried out because they're not conservative enough. Stuff like that happens all the time. You've used the word friends a couple times, and I'm sure there are Republicans and that you include in that. A lot of your Republican colleagues have great things to say about you. And we have listeners who, the moment they heard you're a Democrat, may have an emotional reaction. Either they're really excited because we're finally giving more voice to somebody that might align with their political views, or they're a little apprehensive, like, oh, he's a Democrat, and they immediately are thinking of the Democrats they don't agree with, that they're now putting you in that camp. That's got to be frustrating, but you've also figured out a way to kind of break the mold. How have you been able to do that?
I break bread with people a lot.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time. I jokingly say that I am the chair of the Iceberg Caucus. Most of my political engagement is spent out of sight, out of people's minds, over soup, over salads, over steaks, with people just trying to understand them and learn to trust them, developing trust-based relationships. Because if we don't trust one another, what can we really accomplish? Everything becomes so transactional. Everything becomes so, the stakes of everything become so high because you don't know if this person's going to do the thing they said or if they're going to fulfill their promise. And so establishing trust-based relationships with people, level-headed people. I don't care. I was born in the 70s, and when I was a young man, nobody said, identified themselves as a Democrat first or a Republican first. But now everyone wears their partisan affiliation as like part of their identity. And really kind of winding back that bad social habit in American politics is one of the things that I try to back to modeling. And so the way I do that is I eat a lot with my friends. 100 years ago, we all used to live in the Idaho Hotel, or these two hotels. We all used to eat in the same dining room. We all used to work in the same room. And when you spend that much time looking in the whites of other people's eyes, you get to a point in your relationship, even if you disagree on everything, you do not demonize them. You do not call them names on the internet. You ask questions. How are your kids doing? Is your wife recovering from that fall okay? These are the things that humanize us. And if we can humanize our interpersonal relationships, then we can humanize the resultant politics. And I think that's what most Idahoans want. The problem is the political ecosystem that we have and maintain and incentivize rewards the loudest people.
Yeah.
And the people who aren't, out working the ranch all day, working their 8 to 5 all day. They can't be on the internet all day. And so people who have time to be on the internet all day dominate the political discourse. And how we all overcome that is something that we all have to figure out.
I love the way you articulated that, because the Super Bowl just happened a little while ago. I didn't see a lot of people falling out over, like, I'm not going to be in the same house as an Eagles fan, or some people kind of have a little fun with that. But our party is sometimes comparable to that of our favorite sports team, right? It identifies what we like, what we follow. But the statistic that breaks my heart is like 1 in 5 people that stopped talking to a family member or close friend as a result of the 2016 presidential election. And I'm all for passions and beliefs and fighting for what you stand for, but at the cost of close family friends is something that's disappointing. You worked in the Senate with Senator Leahy. The Senate has remained somewhat, there's a unique amount of decorum there where you still see these senators who disagree quite a bit, still interact.
Yep.
The House is not like that anymore. Do you think we head back towards the days things used to be, or do you think that even, the U.S. Senate becomes more fractionalized?
I think the U.S. Senate will become more fractionalized before it gets better. One of my most formative experiences clerking for Senator Leahy was getting in the train early in my tenure that runs from the Russell Building back to the Capitol Building. And Leahy and I get in the train, and Trent Lott was in the train. He was the only one in there. And those two started talking to each other like they were long-lost college buddies. And I was shocked because I thought these two were supposed to hate each other. Yeah. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat, one's from the South, one's from New England. I thought they talked about their families. They talked about their hobbies. Pat Leahy was a big photographer, so they talked about. And for me, that was my kind of window into this reminder that I would subsequently go on to learn more about, that politics is just people. I mean, I tell people this all the time. The word police, politics, policy, all comes from the same Latin root word polis, which just means people and community. So I think if people can just remember that we are all just people and community, and the politics is a consequence of how we treat one another, I think it will definitely moderate. It will moderate people a little bit, and not necessarily in their beliefs, but in how they treat each other. I think that's really what the crux of this is.
So how do you view the role of civility playing into this? Because the stuff that people can and do say online, most of them wouldn't say it to your face. Maybe some have at town halls. You're a very transparent elected official. You put yourself out there on social media as well, and it is in person. And you get demonized because of your views sometimes, but you also get a lot of credit that's due. Do you think Idaho is leading the nation in our civility, or do we have some work to do?
We all have work to do. I think people forget why civility matters. Civility isn't something you engage in so you can get a gold star on your name on the wall. Civility is something we engage in so that when times are toughest, the people we need to be able to rely on the most feel comfortable coming to us with difficult things.
Yeah.
If they know they're going to be treated with respect, if they know that they're going to be seen, they're going to be heard, they're going to be respected, they're much more likely to come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling with a really important problem and I need your help. But if you are known to treat people uncivilly, you're just going to be left out. And people who are not at the table are on the menu, and I don't want to be on the menu.
Yeah. So, and you're known amongst your colleagues as somebody who regularly deposit into the relationship bank account, right? So you're investing in a lot of your relationships, but you're not known as somebody who often withdraws funds. But the times come that it's very important for you to say, I need some help. What are some things that you have worked on and are currently working on, where you've had to call in those favors and say, I need you to get behind me? And it doesn't happen that often.
No, it doesn't. One of the reasons it doesn't happen that often because the bills, and I've been challenged by some of my constituents to kind of up my game in this regard, but the bills I tend to run tend to be pretty, run of the mill, milquetoast, housekeeping bills. Not a lot of controversy in the bills that I run. And one of the things I will do next year is really kind of see if I can lean a bit more into harder policy problems that we face, see if I can run bills that would address that. I'm going to do that. The other reason I don't draw down on my bank that much is because I don't need to. Most of what I do, back to kind of the iceberg caucus phenomenon, is most of what I do or what I give or take happens out of sight when the stakes are lower. And so sometimes I need a friend to ask a very particular question. So for example, I won't give you specifics, but I'll give you an example kind of how this works. Mm-hmm. In an RS hearing, so when someone brings an idea forward and they ask the committee to print it, and we're making a decision about whether to print it and give it a bill number so that, get a full hearing and all that stuff. You're only allowed a couple of questions. Different chairs grant a little bit more leniency sometimes in how many questions they'll give you, but you only get 2, maybe 3 questions. But sometimes, and anyone, I've never practiced law. I'm a lawyer by training, but I've never practiced law. But people who have know that sometimes you need to get someone to say a very particular thing, but that you can't ask a question that will make them say it. You kind of have to lead them down that road. But you won't get to do that in a print hearing. So sometimes I will ask friends to ask questions that I need to, quote, lay the foundation, so that when I get my 1 or 2 questions, we've gotten the presenter much further down the row so that I can get them on the hook for the thing I need them to say. And that matters because, Idaho has a pretty unfortunate history of passing bills that courts will find unconstitutional. It costs about $250,000 to litigate each of those. And I try to prevent us from going down those roads. And so that's why I think, keeping certain bills from gaining traction is really important. And sometimes I draw down on the bank, but it's private. And so the stakes are low and the transaction cost is a lot lower. Now, rarely will I ever ask them to do something hard publicly. Rarely. I'm not in leadership. If I were in leadership, that would probably be different. And I would probably have to call them more frequently and ask them to do a hard thing more frequently. But I'm not in leadership, so I don't.
Interesting. Getting insider baseball here from you. This is good. When you think of representing constituents, you've got, the few that email you a lot that probably pop into mind really quick. We talk to your conservative colleagues, and we always have the conversation about how do you represent your constituents that don't think the way you think. And for them in really red districts, it's a kind of an interesting conversation. You're in a blue district. You don't have to really worry about kind of getting it from the right. And you're typically the primary process on the left isn't what it looks like on the, in Idaho. It does with Republicans. So how do you kind of make do with, I've been elected by all of them, I got to represent the red ones and the blue ones?
I do a couple of different things. I'm very intentional about that. One of the things I do is so to give you an example of kind of like the lay of the land here, there are about 25 precincts in my district. Okay. And in 2022 and in 2024, I lost 4 of them.
Okay.
We'll call those the red districts.
Sure.
In 2023, after I won my 2022 election, most people don't knock doors until they have to. And they define have to as I need to win the next election. What my team and I decided I was going to do is we were going to reverse that. They cut me a bunch of turfs to go out and knock in this very particular precinct. And I spent the whole off year of 2023 knocking in this district on Republican doors because I was in the position where I didn't have to ask for anything. I didn't have to ask for their vote. All I had to do was say, hey, I'm your representative. I know I'm a Democrat. You might not be, but I'm here to represent you. What do you want me to say? What perspectives do you want me to bring? What problems do you want us addressing? And to be honest, 99 times out of 100, the people, the Republicans in my district, when I go to them and say that, they go, I'm shocked you're even here talking to me. This is great. I need to get back to the football game though. So thanks you. I don't have anything for you. That's great. And every once in a while, someone does have something for me. So I knock on Republican doors in off years. That's one of my. The second thing I've tried to do is really equip my constituents to advocate for themselves. I've heard people say that the divide in Idaho is not really between Republicans and Democrats or urban and rural. The divide in Idaho is between information seekers and information avoiders. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, "Oh, I don't do politics. I don't do politics." But I'm just supposed to vote Democrat. I was raised in a Democratic household. I'm just supposed to vote Democrat. Or I'm just supposed to vote Republican. Those are information avoiders. Information seekers are people that you might not necessarily agree with, but they're in the business of going out, consuming information, and using that information to make decisions they think are best. And I want to equip those people in my district. So we have a number of tools on my website designed to help them help themselves. So, for example, there's the passive tools that we call, for example, if you've ever tried to watch a committee hearing or the House floor debate, it's kind of a difficult thing to do because you have to find the streams, you have to go to Idaho Public Television's website, but to find the agendas, you have to go to the legislature's website. So one of the things we did is we raised some money and we hired some people to concentrate all of that onto one of our pages so that all of that stuff is on one single page. All the streams, all the agendas, one click away, just so that it's easier to watch us and provide oversight. But then we've provided some more active tools. I represent District 19. The Capitol building is in District 19. So it's really, really easy for my constituents to come testify in person. And when I realized this, I said, I'm finding myself giving the same advice over and over. I should just build tools for them that will help them do what I've come to learn. So we have tools on my website at mathiasforidaho.com where you can craft your testimony. You can learn about some of the do's and don'ts, all, again, designed to help my constituents help themselves. And it doesn't matter if they're a Republican. It doesn't matter if they're a Democrat. It doesn't matter if they're unaffiliated. I don't care. I will say, kind of aside from all this, in my experience, Republicans in District 19 are kind of an older, different breed. Sure. And I don't mean age-wise. I mean, they're just the old school, the Simplot home is in District 19. And Republicans who run businesses and run schools, and they're not on the internet all the time. They're not on 4chan and 8chan under anonymous handles. They're just reading newspapers. They're consuming the same types of information that we've all consumed for a century. And so I can't generalize from Republicans in District 19 to Republicans elsewhere. Though I will say I found it really interesting that the Idaho Republican Party is now a constituent in effect, and they rent a commercial house in my district. In fact, I drive by their offices every day, twice a day.
That's a great little tidbit. So some are going to wonder what the motivation is, because not all legislators are going to go above and beyond in that same path. You're a realist. You're not trying to become a governor or U.S. senator here. You made that clear. Yep. You're not trying to just immediately change everybody's minds on these core issues, whether it be guns and abortion, all these things. You're picking your fights. You're choosing which ones you want to go. But why work so hard at this when you, in theory, could keep this job and do a lot less?
Well, the main answer is that I'm just a public servant at heart.
Yeah.
I own my own consulting company. I love what the private sector does for me, my family, America, but I'm always going to have this urge to serve my community in positions that are a really good fit for me. I mean, when I first ran, people were like, why don't you run for city council first? Or why don't you run for Ada County Commission? Why this? And I was pretty honest. I said, I worked for the state of Idaho. I wrote a doctoral dissertation about state policy. The thought of waking up every day and having to negotiate municipal waste contracts as an Ada County commissioner, which is something that absolutely has to happen, it wasn't going to tug at my passion. It wasn't going to drive me to be the best possible version. So I'm in a position now where I'm extremely fulfilled, even though I lose almost all the time. I'm happy at times, I'm sad at times, but I'm fulfilled. And fulfillment really is kind of my key driver. The second I think lesser answer is that what I learned in the military is that when you are part of a team, you have to do the things you are particularly good at, and you have to do them when people expect you to do them. My first captain taught me, to set the table. My first unit out of boot camp, I was 18 years old. I was in, if you've ever seen, The Perfect Storm, that's the Georges Banks, part of the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, heavy fishing grounds. I was a fisheries enforcement officer. We did search and rescue, 10-person patrol boat. And I had the worst watch rotation. I had the worst collateral duties, like cleaning the head. And I was miserable a lot, seasick a lot. And my captain recognized this. And the lesson I learned from him is, Chris, it is okay to feel this way. You're probably having doubts about whether you should have even enlisted. This seems miserable. All of those feelings are legitimate. I see you. What I need you to remember, however, is when the red light goes off and we are screaming across the North Atlantic to save lives because people are drowning, ships are taking on water, ships are on fire, people are under duress. When we get there, the Avengers are not going to fall out of the sky. It's just you and your 9 shipmates. And when we get there, if you don't do the 2 things you are expected to do, and your shipmates don't do the 2 things they're expected to do, this whole system of interreliance and interdependability and interdependence falls apart. And the only way the United States Coast Guard punches above its weight is if we can achieve that multiplier effect. So promise me you will do the 2 things you're expected to do. And so I spent my first, couple sessions in this legislature figuring out, what am I uniquely positioned to do? What am I uniquely able to do? And now that I know what that is, it brings me a lot of comfort, and I've figured out how to do it at a sustainable rate. And I'll be honest, of all of the House members, I live the closest to the building. It's the easiest for me to just be around the dining room table with my family, sleeping in my own bed. And that is not a privilege I take for granted at all. So I'm pretty fortunate in that regard.
But it's unique where so many people, when they lose, they take their bat and ball and go home. But even when you don't get your way, there are times you compromise, and then there are times that you get nothing, but you still show up the next day.
Yeah, well, that's just the nature of my childhood. I mean, I was not born to privilege. My whole childhood was, a big challenge. And so I'm in the Idaho legislature now, and people are like, Chris, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. And the short answer is, I have a pretty high tolerance for discomfort because of the circumstances of my upbringing. So nothing really rattles me unless I need to be rattled. And I think people who know me really well know that the only thing that rattles me the most is when I see up close the most vulnerable people be singled out and then targeted by the state. Nothing upsets me more than that, because there's no need for it. It's anti-American, and it's not what most people sit around their kitchen tables. It's not what they go into their pews on Sunday saying they're going to do. Yet for some reason, every once in a while, we find ourselves reverting back to this desire to really single out and target people. And nothing gets me more emotional and worked up than that.
Yeah. Think about Chris as the dad. As you raise your kids here, you're out in the Idaho forest camping over the weekend in the summer. Are there times where you think, all right, kids, when you get old enough, get out of the state, this isn't going the right direction? Or are you the opposite, where you're saying, we're headed in the right direction, this is where I want my kids to stay, this is where I want them to be successful?
I never tell my kids that they should move away. And I never want to imply that they don't have control over their environment, that they don't have the ability to step into the arena and fix things that they think are broken. And that running, while an option, is not one you need to move to the top of the list. You have other options. My kids have a roof over their head. They don't suffer for their needs. If kids like that are just going to take their ball and go home, we're all in trouble. But at the same time, I think it's important that they experience the world around them in Boise, in Idaho, but outside of Idaho. Outside of the United States, my kids are going to get passports for the first time this summer. The more you know about the outside world, I've been all over the world, and the more you know about the outside world, the more you realize how absolutely bad to the bone the United States of America is, and Idaho. The safety and the opportunity to find a job I mean, housing affordability is a different story now, but, when I got here for college, like, you could buy a house compared to most people in the world. We've got a really good thing going on. And so I think my kids know that is worth standing up for and fighting for. And until you've given that your all, thinking about just packing up and moving away isn't an option. But I will tell you, I talk to people all the time who can't do it anymore, who have trans kids or whose partner is an OB and isn't comfortable trying to navigate our abortion laws because while the Attorney General might say they're crystal clear, they are not. They're not. So when people do have to pack up and move away from Idaho, I don't judge. I don't shame. I just try to empathize and try to understand.
Yeah, I love it. We started a story before we started recording of me having breakfast with an ag leader who's as dark red as they come, who told me that one of his favorite elected leaders in this whole state is you. And I hope our listeners got a sense of why today, because you are a unicorn in the state and it has nothing to do with your policy affiliation or your party affiliation, I should say. It's the way you treat people. It's the way you're deliberative. It's the way you think about things and address things. And I think more of you would be great in the state. You are a unicorn in that regard. You're kind to everyone. You've been kind with your time today. So anything we can do to help you, but we'd love to have you back. And there's a lot of more issues we can dig into, but we got to get you back to the session.
I would love that. And it's actually, I'm realizing now that this has been a breath of fresh air because we didn't talk about a single piece of legislation on the third or second reading calendar. I talk about that stuff all day. So It was nice to be here and be able to talk about perhaps more important things. So thanks for having me.
I agree. You'll come back?
Promise.
Okay, we got you on record saying that.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Till next time.
All right.